Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very accomplished professional, a former police officer from Alberta, Canada, Brian Livingston. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Brian is the founder and CEO of MyGuru Mentoring. As I mentioned, he's a former police officer, and Brian is on a mission to mentor 10,000 first responders to each create businesses worth at least $2.5 million by 2033. So, Brian, before we talk about MyGuru Mentoring, tell me about your journey from being a police officer to founding your business.
I think the best way to start and understand why I do what I do is to understand, like you said, where my journey and where I came from. And it was probably about 25 years ago. I remember laying in bed at night, and for those who are first responders especially, they'll understand what I'm talking about. Now, this is, obviously we're starting to date ourselves when I start talking about the old alarm clock with the red numbers in the dark, right? Yes. And I used to lay up at night looking at the ceiling, and I can still actually remember, I can still draw out the water stain that we had in the roof, in the ceiling of the room. And I remember doing that and rolling over and looking at the light and just counting down the minutes until my next shift was happening, because I couldn't calm myself down enough to actually be able to sleep. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I can't believe these guys were correct. And what I mean by that is I had three what turned out to be significant events. And one was right after I became a police officer. And this guy came up to me and introduced himself to me. This is my first week out of police college, and I'm brand new and I'm eager. And he introduced himself to me and he goes, "Get out while you can. Quit now." Just and I was like, "What are you talking about, man? This is it. This is great." And then second of all, same week, a guy walks up to me and he says, "How do you sleep at night?" And I said, "Awesome." I said, I don't have any problem sleeping. Everything's great. And he goes, "Well, that's going to change." And the third one was from my father. And my father said to me, he said, "Pick two people who you really think have it together at the police force you're with, and pick them and then, imitate, right? Mimic and imitate, figure out what they're doing, because that's what you're going to do to be the most successful police officer you can be." And 1 year after I started with the force, it wasn't even what it was. Sorry, not even. It was 6 months after I'd started, and so less than my first year. And the officer, I chose two officers. One eventually went on to be chief.
Wow!
So that was a great choice. He's an amazing individual. The other guy, 6 months after I started, took his own life. Him and I had lockers across from each other in the change room, and he took his own life with his gun in the locker room, right in between where him and I sat and got changed. And so I just, I'm laying in bed going, "Man, I can't get calmed down. This job is awful. I can't sleep at night anymore." And one of the mentors that I chose felt that the only way to get out was to take his own life, was the only way. And I was just like, I've got to get out. Right. And so, I eventually, I did. I honestly, I didn't even know what I was really going to do at that time, but I got out. And the biggest problem that I found, well, first of all, I didn't know what I was going to do, so I didn't have a plan in place, right? And second of all, I didn't have a mentor who was going to be able to guide me through
Mm,
what I needed to do now.
mm,
And throughout my years post policing, I run into lots of people who are first responders, and I can really understand what they're going through because I went through it, right? I went to those fatalities. I went where you're literally having to, like, I had one accident scene I went to where I had to measure two different body parts
wow.
in order to do up my diagram of this accident scene. And so I understand what they're going through. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now, is because they need to know that when they hit what I refer to it as, or I refer to it as that point,
Mm-hmm.
right? They need to know that there is something out there beyond,
Mm,
right? Because we're another 20, 5 years beyond where this was happening with me.
mm,
And obviously mental health has really much more come into the forefront.
mm,
I still don't think it's enough,
mm-hmm.
but especially in the first responder category of employment, eh, it's we've got to get your mental health straight
Yeah,
so that you can then come back to work.
correct.
Right. And well, what happens with those people that can't come back to work?
Mm,
Right. They know that they can't put on that uniform for another day. They
mm,
can't answer one more 911 call, or
mm,
those types of things. They can't do it anymore.
mm,
What happens to those people? And there's really nothing out there that says, okay, well, you can't come back to us, so here's the next steps that you need to do.
mm,
And instead they just kind of get dropped,
mm,
right? And
mm,
and I dropped myself. There wasn't my force actually started creating a mental health program because of me, but
mm.
it was subsequent to me, not while I was
Amazing,
there.
amazing, amazing. So, how many
You
years did you spend in the police force?
just under 5.
Okay.
Just
And
under 5. It took me about 3 before it really started hitting me.
wow. And what are some of the common challenges, Brian, first responders face when transitioning to becoming entrepreneurs?
First of all, the lack of a plan, right? It's one of the biggest things, in anything in business, right, or
Mm,
anything in life.
yeah,
If you don't have a target, right, how do you know where you're going?
right.
And then the question is, if you don't have a target, then we can't fill in how we're going to get there.
Mm,
So we first of all have to have them say, okay, this is where I need to get to. Is it going to be a side gig? Are
mm,
they going to do it on their days off? First of
mm,
all, are they close to retirement? Are
mm,
they? There's all these different things that we have to figure out. Do you have holiday time? Do you have bank time?
mm,
There's some officers that have, like, I've got like a year and a half worth of bank time,
mhm.
built up that they can use to leverage. Do they have a
Right.
right? The first step is we need to get a plan in
Mm,
place.
mm, mm. And what are some of the key steps that you follow in your mentoring process?
Well, first of all, right off the bat, in terms of the mentoring, if you are not actively seeking mental health help,
Hmm.
I'm not going to work with you if you need it.
Mm,
Because the first thing people have got to understand is I'm not a therapist.
yeah.
I'm not licensed in any way.
Mm,
Um, I I'm I would be doing a disservice to you to try
right.
and do that. So if you're needing that, you need to go and get that first.
Correct.
Second of all is we've then, like I said, we've got to nail down the plan, but we've got to figure out who you are, right? It's such a big part. I literally just did this with somebody yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
and we went through, I said, who are you? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, okay, well, are you a mother? Are you a sister? Are you a daughter? Are you,
Mm-hmm.
because it was a lady I was
Yeah.
talking.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next questions come in. Are you a police officer?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Are you a fire, do you work for the fire department? Are you an
Mm-hmm.
EMT? Right? And so by building out this who are you list,
Mm-hmm.
they suddenly start to see that this world that has been engulfed by their career
Mm-hmm.
is such a tiny part of who they actually really are as a person,
Right.
right? And so then we start to expand their mind
Mm-hmm.
in terms of what real possibilities are out there, because so many of them go, well, here's all my qualifications,
Mm-hmm.
and they seem to feel that all of those qualifications means another job in a related career that they're already
Mm-hmm.
doing,
Right.
right? And that's not good for them,
Correct.
because they're still going to run into the same issues. So
Mm-hmm.
let's figure out who you really are. Let's figure out your skill sets, and let's figure out what we can do with those skill sets. What are marketable,
Hmm.
right?
Interesting.
Where can you do the most help?
Very interesting. And is this also, these steps, are they part of your core philosophy behind your From Broken to Rebuilt program?
Oh, completely.
Okay.
Completely. Another big part that we've got to work on is we've got to work on what we call your money mindset,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, I actually am part of Grant Cardone's 10x certified coaches
Mm-hmm.
and there's a bunch of us throughout the world,
Mm-hmm.
and one of Grant's big things is you've got to get your mind right about your money.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I was talking with somebody about this recently, and the guy said, I wish I would have known that 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just, dealing with me. Well, now we've got to get your mind right about your money. Well,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully you've gotten your mind right 20 years ago
Right.
about your money, regardless as to what career you're in.
Mm-hmm.
You need to figure out once again, you know, where do I want to get financially and how am I going to get there so that
Mm-hmm.
we can then reverse engineer
Mm-hmm.
that process. So work with all of that with them as well, because if somebody's 2 years in, they're in a much different financial position than a guy who's already got a family of five,
Mm-hmm.
for
Very,
example,
very
right?
interesting.
So
Yeah.
that's another big part that we've got to work on.
And Brian, tell me, what are some of the common misconceptions about entrepreneurship that you have encountered when you first start talking to so many first responders who you help?
Well, first responders are really used to a salary,
Mm,
and that's part of what locks them into their job,
mm,
is they become dependent upon that. And so they look at entrepreneurship, and with this what if mentality, it
mm,
doesn't work, right? Well, first of all, if your mentality is that you believe it isn't going to work,
mm,
then you and I both know it's not going to work,
mm.
right? Because you're going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing, one of the biggest myths is that there's such a risk into becoming an entrepreneur. Well, first of all, there's risk everywhere in life. You can't get away from it.
Mm,
But what we've got to do is realize that this potential risk
mm.
can come with a massive outsized reward to it
Right.
that is well beyond anything that they could ever achieve in the career that they're currently doing. Like I
Fascinating.
have one gentleman that I helped guide several years ago. He makes 6 times what he was making back when he was an officer, and he takes more days off. He takes more vacations. He is just, I can't believe this, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's having the belief, right, that it's possible, and understanding that the rewards, you've got to wrap your mind around the reward, but understand that really money's just a number, right? If and you know this, if you believe that $10,000 is an outrageous number per month that you'll never achieve, you'll never achieve it, right? But the difference between 10,000 a month and $100,000 a month is a zero.
Correct.
And that's the biggest myth, is there's so much risk. And that, I think, more than anything else, comes from all of your friends who, like even my father, get a salary, get a pension. That was my dad's life, and that was his guidance. Right? So you have all these people you're going, well, I'm thinking I want to go out and start a business, and they're going, oh no, businesses fail. What about your pension? Do you know what I mean?
Yep. I'm with you completely. My
Yeah.
next question is that, what are some of the strategies to balance business development and personal well-being?
Well, I think first of all with that is, obviously you've always got to find the right balance for you and your family.
Right.
And that's got to be important. But you need to, everybody in your family needs to be involved with that. Okay. And if you're single, then that's fine. It's much easier to balance, but you've got to figure out, okay, where are the priorities, right? Both personal and also with the business, because this business is not just affecting you, it's affecting your spouse, it's affecting your kids. And to be the most successful you can be, you've got to really get a buy-in from your family, right? Everybody needs to be moving in the same direction.
Right.
And, sometimes that's going to be, well, today I've got to work a 12-hour day. In February, I literally got February, in December, I apologize. I literally got to turn my phone off from business for 2 weeks. Right? Where I just, we got to go on a cruise, and we were at Disney World, and, and I was just like, this is my personal time. Right? Yep. But it's important to have everybody knowing what the goal is and getting everybody on the same page.
Well said. My next question to you is that, how do you help your mentees identify their unique strengths? They're coming out from being as first responders. You're telling them, asking them questions. Who are you? What do you want? What is your focus on money? But how do you help them to harness some of their unique strengths?
It really depends on what those strengths are going to be.
Right.
And one of the biggest ones that, coming away from where they're at, is they've beaten themselves down emotionally. They're beaten down physically, they're beaten down mentally, and emotionally. They're angry and they're upset, and they feel alone, no matter how, caring your spouse and your kids may be. They feel alone, and like I said, they're broken. Right? And so the first thing is, we've got to get them to believe in themselves again. Right? That's really, very important. Let's believe in you.
Mm.
Let's believe that you can make things happen. I just had a meeting yesterday with, a lady who makes $1,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that she makes.
Mm.
And, I talked to her and she she has this limiting belief about herself,
Mm.
and she's just, over the past 25 years of her life, she has gone from a 4.0 university grad, who was the number one salesperson in the company of about 700 people. And
Mm.
sometimes over the last 25 years from that, she's down to going, I'm nothing.
Mm.
I'm, and so I'm just like, who are you?
Mm.
Right? Let, maybe it's who were you, but let's bring that back to the present.
Mm.
Let's get them believing in themselves. And so then once we identify that, then we're going to tweak and we're going to work around what those skill sets are, right? But there's, I say to some people sometime, I go, because I live in Alberta, we live in northern Alberta. It's snowing, it's minus
Mm.
50 Celsius out here.
Mm.
I say to some people, I go, do you have a strong back? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, do you own a shovel? Right. And I'm like, you just created a business,
Mm.
right? It's not hard to see what's out there,
Mm.
you know but let's figure it out. So we've got to, what's marketable for you.
Mm. Fascinating. So I have time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
The next question is, what are the trends you are seeing in the types of businesses first responders are starting?
um some of them still go on to related roles,
Mm.
from the career that they were back when they were a first responder.
Mm.
um some of them, a lot of them will actually go into something that's, not like construction related.
Mhm.
A lot of times, like, they know how to build houses, they know how to do, repairs, they understand engines, a lot of them
Mm.
actually have developed a lot of knowledge
Mm.
over that time. So we'll see a lot of them move into those types of businesses as well,
Right,
whether they
right.
open up a garage or whatever, furniture
Mm.
making. Like, surprisingly, they have a
Lot
lot
of
lot
talent.
of skills.
Mm. Fascinating. Brian, my last question to you, and this is for many, many, many people from around the world who will listen to our conversation and who will, pick up a lot of very, very interesting points from your conversation with me today. What would you say are a few lessons you would want to give someone starting off on their entrepreneurial journey?
The biggest one: find a mentor.
Mm.
Right, that's the first one. And then you want to see what's successful
Mm.
and mimic and master it.
Mm.
Right, model it, mimic, master. Because if what they're doing is being successful, then you can do it as
Mm.
well.
Mm.
Right,
Mm.
but the mentor will help immensely, because they're going to, all so many traps, pitfalls, everything that I fell into business wise. It would have been so helpful if I had somebody there that was going,
Right.
don't do that.
Careful.
This is the end result of this. And sometimes you're going to jump in anyways,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
But to have a guide, and then find what's successful and model it.
Amazing. And on that note, Brian, and your wonderful lessons, find a mentor. And the second one, which is so, so powerful, model, mimic, and master success. I think that is so powerful. Thank you so much for speaking to me, Brian, about your own journey. What an absolutely fabulous journey you've had from a police officer. Thank you for sharing some of the pains that you went through and how you actually encountered these. And not only did you come out much stronger, but it's amazing how you have supported and mentoring so many other people, so many other first responders in being able to find their feet all over again. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.